My first day at the company felt like walking into a storm, not knowing if I'd make it out. The place buzzed with energy, folks rushing about with papers, phones glued to their ears, and the clack of keyboards nonstop. There I was, in my new blazer, trying to blend into the chaos, feeling like a sheep lost in the city. "Hey, you must be the new manager." "I'm Mark, head of the department." "You got a name, or should I just call you Newbie?" A voice cut through the noise, pulling me back to reality. I turned to face him, Mark, the guy I heard so much about. Tall, with a smirk that probably got him in and out of trouble, and eyes sharp as knives. "I'm Julie," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "And I'd prefer Julie over Newbie." He laughed, a deep sound that somehow made the room seem less intimidating. "Alright, Julie, let's see if you can keep up. This place waits for no one. You ready to dive in, or you gonna stand there looking scared?" His blunt words stung a bit, but I knew this was the real deal. No sugarcoating, no hand-holding. I was here to make a mark, not to be coddled. "I'm ready. Just show me where to start." Mark's smirk turned into a slight smile, one that said he might have underestimated me. "Come on, then. I'll show you the ropes. But don't expect me to go easy on you. You'll have to earn your keep here." As we walked through the maze of desks and buzzing lights, Mark rattled off names and projects, his words a rapid fire that I struggled to catch. "And another thing, don't expect everyone to play nice. This isn't kindergarten. It's a battlefield. You got the guts for it?" I nodded, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I didn't come here to play. I'm here to work and to win." "Good answer. Let's see if you mean it." Mark led me to my new office, a small space with a window overlooking the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, deadlines, and learning curves steep enough to give anyone vertigo. Mark was relentless, always pushing, always demanding more. But behind the tough exterior, I caught glimpses of something else, a teacher, maybe even a friend. "Julie, this report looks like it was written by a 5-year-old. Do it again," Mark would say, tossing the papers on my desk without a second glance. "Or, you're gonna let Johnson talk over you like that? Stand up for your ideas, or they'll walk all over you." It was tough love, the kind that grated but also grew on you. Mark wasn't just teaching me about the job, he was showing me how to survive in a world where you're only as good as your last success. One evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights danced in the darkness, Mark knocked on my office door, a couple of beers in hand. "You did good today, Julie. Didn't think you had it in you to stand up to Johnson like that." I took the beer, our fingers brushing slightly. "Thanks, Mark. Means a lot, coming from you." We sat in silence for a moment, the city's hum a backdrop to our thoughts. "This place can chew you up and spit you out if you're not careful," Mark said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard. "But you, I think you might just make it." "Because of your tough love?" I teased, taking a sip of the beer. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe. Or maybe you're just as stubborn and hard-headed as I am." As the weeks turned into months, Mark and I found ourselves tangled in something more complicated than mentorship. Our after-hours chats turned into dinners, and those dinners turned into more. We knew the stakes, office romances were a big no-no, a taboo that could cost us both our jobs. But the heart wants what it wants, doesn't it? "Julie, we're playing with fire here," Mark would whisper, his voice heavy with a mix of desire and caution, after one of our secret meetups. "I know, but I can't help it," I'd respond, my heart racing, feeling the thrill and the danger all at once. "Let's just keep this between us. No one has to know." And so, our secret affair began. We became experts at hiding our feelings in the daylight, saving them for the shadows where we could be ourselves, if only for a moment. The risk made everything more intense, but it was a game of Russian roulette. Every stolen kiss, every whispered promise, was a bullet in the chamber, and we were both playing with the trigger. Life's funny, you know? One minute, you're sneaking around, trying to hide your love like it's some kind of contraband, and the next, you're facing a moment that could change everything. That's exactly how it went down with Mark and me. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of evening that didn't seem special until it suddenly was. We were at my place, a modest apartment that had become our little sanctuary away from the prying eyes of the world. The air was filled with the smell of the spaghetti I had cooked, a simple dish, but Mark swore it was the best he'd ever had. "Julie, you know, this sneaking around is getting old," Mark said out of the blue, his fork pausing mid-air. His voice was casual, but his eyes were anything but. I chuckled, thinking he was about to crack a joke. "What do you suggest, a billboard announcing Mark and Julie's Love Shack?" He didn't laugh. Instead, he put his fork down and took my hand, his touch sending a familiar thrill up my arm. "I'm serious, Julie. I've been thinking. Why don't we just make this official? Marry me, Julie. Let's stop hiding." The words hit me like a bolt of lightning. Marry him? Was he serious? My heart started racing, and a part of me wanted to say yes, before my brain could catch up. But then, reality kicked in. "Mark, you know we can't. The company." "Screw the company," he cut in, his usual calm replaced with a passion I hadn't seen before. "I love you, and I'm tired of pretending like you're not the most important part of my life. We'll figure it out. We always do." His words, so raw and honest, melted any reservations I had. How could I say no to a man who was willing to risk it all for us? "Yes," I whispered, the word barely making it out, before Mark pulled me into a kiss that sealed our promise. The next day was a whirlwind. We knew we had to face the music and tell our boss about our decision. The company had strict rules about relationships in the workplace, and one of us would have to leave. But at that moment, nothing felt impossible as long as we were together. "Mr. Reynolds, we have something to tell you," Mark started, his hand gripping mine under the table as we sat across from our boss in his imposing office. Mr. Reynolds looked up from his paperwork, his gaze sharp. "I'm listening." Mark squeezed my hand, a silent source of strength, and then laid it all out. "Julie and I are getting married. We know the company's policy, and we're prepared to deal with the consequences." Mr. Reynolds didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked like a man who had seen it all. "I appreciate your honesty. You know the rules. One of you will have to resign." Mark was quick to lay down how it was going to be, his voice firm, brooking no argument. "It's going to be Julie who resigns. I've got the career and the salary that we need to keep things going strong. She'll stay home, take care of our future." I didn't say anything at first, the weight of his words sinking in. Part of me wanted to argue, to say we should find another way. But then, the resolve in Mark's eyes told me this was the decision he believed was best for us. "All right," I said finally, my voice steady. "If that's what we've decided, then I'll resign." The ride back from Mr. Reynolds' office was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. Mark kept trying to reassure me, saying it was for the best, but the silence between us spoke volumes. "Julie, you know this is the right move, right? My job's the stable one. It just makes sense," Mark finally said, breaking the silence as we stood at the door of our shared future. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt. But all I saw was certainty. "I know, Mark. It's just a big change, that's all. But we'll make it work. We always do." The honeymoon phase in our suburban home didn't last long. At first, it was all laughter and shared dreams, but then the atmosphere started to change, and not for the better. Mark began to show a side of him I hadn't seen before, a side that expected everything to be just so, perfect and without a single flaw. One evening, as I was trying to get dinner ready after spending the day cleaning the house, Mark came home early. The house smelled like the roast I had in the oven, and I thought it would cheer him up. I was wrong. "Julie, what's this?" Mark's voice cut through the quiet of the kitchen, sharp and cold. I turned to see him holding a plate with a slight frown. "It's dinner, Mark. I tried a new recipe I thought you'd like," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice. He took a bite and immediately made a face. "This is what you call dinner? It's bland. Can't you do anything right?" He dumped the plate into the trash with a clatter that made me jump. I felt a sting of tears in my eyes, but I fought them back. "I'm sorry, Mark. I'll make something else," I murmured, turning back to the stove, my hands shaking slightly. "No, forget it. I'm not hungry anymore." His words were a dismissal, and he stormed off to the living room, leaving me alone with my failed dish and a sinking heart. But it didn't stop there. Mark's demands grew by the day. If a shirt wasn't ironed to his liking, it ended up thrown on the floor. If he found a single speck of dust, he'd make a show of wiping it up with his finger and then wave it in front of my face. "What do I keep you around for if you can't even keep the house clean?" he'd say, and each word felt like a slap. One night, he came home late to find me asleep on the couch, waiting up for him. The TV was still on, a low hum in the quiet room. He woke me up, not gently, but by snatching the blanket away. "Why are you sleeping? The house is a mess," he barked, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of disorder. I rubbed my eyes, confused and tired. "Mark, it's 2 a.m. What mess are you talking about?" He didn't answer, just stomped off to our bedroom, leaving me to wonder what I had missed. The next morning, I found a list on the kitchen counter, items he expected to be done by the time he got back. It was like living with a ticking time bomb, never knowing what would set him off next. I tried to talk to him about it one evening, tried to understand where all this was coming from. "Mark, can we talk? It feels like you're always angry with me. What's going on?" He just looked at me, cold and distant. "There's nothing to talk about. I work all day, and I expect to come home to a clean house and a decent meal. Is that too much to ask?" "But I'm trying my best," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Clearly, your best isn't good enough." And with that, he left the room, leaving me standing there, feeling smaller and more alone than ever. My attempts to stand up for myself didn't go unnoticed, but they sure didn't go unpunished either. After one particularly heated argument where I dared suggest a divorce, thinking maybe the threat of it would shake him up, he retaliated in a way I hadn't expected. "You want to play tough, Julie? Fine. Let's see how you manage without access to the bank accounts," Mark spat out, his face twisted in anger. The next day, I found out he wasn't bluffing. My card was declined at the grocery store, leaving me mortified and empty-handed. When I confronted him about it, his response chilled me to the bone. "Learn your place, Julie. You don't threaten me. You need to understand who's in charge here." Stuck in a house with dwindling supplies, I felt my independence slipping away. Mark carried on as usual, unaffected, dining out for lunch and dinner, while I was left to scrounge around for whatever was left in the pantry. Feeling desperate, I broached the topic of divorce again, hoping maybe this time it would bring some sense into him. Surprisingly, it did, but not in the way I expected. "Divorce? Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what that would do to my reputation?" he hissed. Yet, the day after that conversation, Mark did a complete 180. He came home with flowers, something he hadn't done since our early days, and even arranged a romantic dinner at home, just for the two of us. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe he realized what he stood to lose. Maybe this was him trying to make amends. But like a mirage, that hope vanished as quickly as it appeared. The gentle, attentive man who brought me flowers was gone, replaced once again by the cold, demanding stranger I'd come to live with. It was a cruel game of emotional whiplash, one that left me more confused and isolated than ever. Mark's parents, bless their hearts, saw none of this. To them, we were the picture-perfect couple, living out a suburban dream. Whenever they came around, I played the part, smiling and nodding, while Mark played the doting husband. But heaven forbid I slip up, show a crack in the facade. The consequences, as Mark liked to remind me, were swift. One night, after his parents left from one of their visits, Mark decided my performance hadn't been up to par. "You could have been a bit more enthusiastic tonight. My parents think we're happy, Julie. Don't ruin that," he said, his tone icy. When I tried to defend myself, to explain that I was doing my best, it only angered him more. Your best? That's your best? Maybe you need a night on the sofa to think about what your best really means. And just like that, I found myself banished from our bedroom, lying on the sofa in the dark, wondering how my life had come to this. Winter hit hard that year, turning the streets into skating rinks overnight. I remember thinking I should be careful as I headed out to the store, but caution wasn't enough to keep me on my feet. I slipped on the ice, felt a sharp pain, and then nothing but the cold seeping through my coat as I lay there, waiting for help. Passers-by were quick to call an ambulance, and I spent the day in a blur of x-rays and doctors telling me I'd broken my leg. By the time they put me in a cast and sent me home, it was already dark. I tried calling Mark from the hospital, tried to tell him what happened, but all I got was his voicemail. So, I sent him a message and hoped he'd understand. The taxi dropped me off at our house, and I hobbled to the door, leaning heavily on my crutches. The moment Mark opened the door, I knew something was wrong. His face was twisted in anger, not concern. "Where have you been? I come home to no dinner, and you're nowhere to be found," he barked, before even greeting me. I was in shock, pain throbbing through my leg, as I tried to explain. "Mark, I broke my leg. I've been in the hospital all day. Look." I lifted the edge of my coat to show him the cast, thinking surely this would soften his anger. But it didn't. "Excuses, Julie. Always excuses with you. A broken leg is no reason for laziness," he snapped back, as if my injury was a personal inconvenience to him. Tears pricked my eyes, not just from the pain but from the utter disbelief. "Mark, I can't cook or clean properly like this. Maybe we could hire an au pair, just for the 3 months until I'm better?" His response was a laugh, short and bitter. "Spend my money because you can't do your duties? No way. You'll just have to manage." And just like that, I was left to fend for myself. Cooking was a nightmare, each step a new level of pain. Cleaning was even worse, trying to balance on crutches while wiping down surfaces and sweeping floors. Mark watched me struggle every day, offering no help, only criticism if something wasn't up to his standard. That was my breaking point. Not the fall, not the broken leg, but the realization that the man I married had so little compassion, so little love left for me. I was more than just hurt, I was broken, not just physically, but deep down where it mattered most. It was a day like any other, or so I thought, hobbling around on one leg, trying to keep the house up to Mark's impossible standards. The pain was a constant companion, but on that day, it was overshadowed by a growing sense of defiance. I'd reached my limit, fed up with the way Mark treated me, especially after the incident with the trash. I'd forgotten to take it out, a simple mistake, but Mark turned it into a spectacle. He came home, saw the full trash can, and without a word, dumped it right there on the floor next to me. "Clean it up," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. I did as he said, fighting back tears, the pain in my leg burning with each step I took to tidy his mess. That night, I couldn't sleep, thoughts racing through my head. By morning, my decision was made. I confronted him with divorce papers, my hand trembling, but my resolve firm. Mark just laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "You think you can scare me with divorce?" he scoffed, taking the papers, but not looking at them. "This time I'm not scaring you, Mark. I'm serious," I said, meeting his gaze, trying to convey just how much I meant it. His laughter stopped, replaced by a smirk. "Fine, I'll sign them. But let's do this properly, go to a lawyer in the city." I should have known it was too easy, too smooth. But I was desperate to be free, to end this nightmare. So, I agreed, and we drove together. Halfway there, on the highway, he pulled over, mumbling some excuse about the wheel needing air. "Get out for a sec," he said. I trusted him. I got out. And then, before I could even realize what was happening, he drove off, leaving me there, alone and stranded with my broken leg in the biting cold. Panic set in, but I had to act. I called him, using the recording function on my phone, because I needed evidence, proof of this cruelty. "Mark, come back. This isn't funny," I said, my voice shaking from cold and fear. His laughter crackled through the phone, icy and sharp. Facing the consequences of your decision, Julie. You want to be independent? Solve this yourself. And then he hung up. I was left standing there on the side of the road, cars whizzing by, my heart sinking. Betrayed, abandoned, but most of all, determined. That's when a car pulled up. To my surprise, it was my former boss, Mr. Reynolds, who also happened to be Mark's boss. His brow furrowed in concern as he rolled down the window. Julie, what on earth are you doing out here, especially in this condition? He asked, his voice laced with worry. I hesitated, not sure where to start or how much to share. But then, the floodgates opened. I told him everything, how Mark had been treating me, the accident, and finally, how he left me stranded on the side of the highway with a broken leg. The words poured out, raw and unfiltered. Mr. Reynolds' expression darkened with each word I said. This is unacceptable, Julie. Get in the car. We're going to sort this out, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He drove me to his office, offering me a hot coffee that warmed my hands, but couldn't touch the chill in my bones. After I settled in, he excused himself for a moment. I didn't know what he planned, but I trusted him. He returned shortly, mentioning he had invited Mark over under the guise of an urgent meeting. When Mark walked in and saw me, his face went white as a sheet. Julie? What? Sit down, Mark. We have a lot to discuss. Mr. Reynolds interrupted, his voice calm, but with an edge that made Mark comply without a word. Mr. Reynolds didn't mince his words. Mark, I've been informed of your behavior, both as a husband and indirectly as an employee. It's inexcusable. I can't have someone who exhibits such cruelty on my team. You're fired. Mark tried to defend himself, throwing a panicked look my way. Julie, tell him you're exaggerating. This is just a misunderstanding. That's when I played the recording of our last conversation, the one where he laughed after abandoning me on the highway. The room fell silent as my voice and Mark's laughter filled the space. There was nothing left for him to say. He knew it, I knew it, and Mr. Reynolds knew it. Mark left the office, head hung low, the finality of the situation settling around us like a heavy cloak. Mr. Reynolds turned to me, his expression softening. Julie, I'm so sorry you went through this. If there's anything I can do. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Just this. Listening to me, believing me. It's more than I could have asked for, I said, the weight of the past months starting to lift ever so slightly. He nodded, understanding. You're welcome here, Julie. Take some time to heal, and if you ever want to come back, your job is waiting for you. Finally, it was over. The court didn't just grant me the divorce, they ordered Mark to pay me $100,000 for all the hell he put me through. Having that recording was a game changer, it was the undeniable proof that swung everything in my favor. When Mark's parents heard the whole story, they couldn't even look him in the eye. They came to me, all apologies and sorrowful faces. We're so sorry, Julie. We had no idea. I told them straight. You've got nothing to apologize for. It's not your fault he turned out this way. But inside, I felt a bitter sort of satisfaction knowing they saw Mark for who he really was. Losing his job was the cherry on top. Mr. Reynolds didn't waste any time showing Mark the door, and he made a point of telling me I was welcome back anytime. So, I went back to work, back to something resembling a normal life. It felt good, walking into the office, knowing I'd stood my ground and came out the other side stronger. With the divorce settlement, I rented a cozy apartment, a little place just for me. It wasn't just a new home, it was a fresh start, a place where the shadows of my marriage to Mark couldn't reach me. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the memory of Mark and all the pain he caused began to fade. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding myself and my life. I made new friends, rediscovered hobbies I'd forgotten I loved, and began to enjoy life again, on my own terms. Sometimes, colleagues would tiptoe around the subject of my divorce, but I'd just laugh it off. That chapter's closed, I'd tell them. I'm all about the next adventure now. And it was true. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my destiny. Mark had tried to break me, but in the end, he was just a footnote in my story, a bad memory fading into insignificance.